If you don't have one, Carrie is passing out the save the date card only because it has the prayer that we'll pray together on the back, and I know not everyone has long distance vision, so. Come on in. Liz, thanks for joining us. I see that you're here on Zoom.
Noticed that. I saw the impact on you. Well, I mean, something.
Come in.
Good, how are you?
Welcome, friends. It is 9 o'clock, and because again, your forum presenter is also your celebrant, and oh, woe is me, our associate rector is traveling. How will I survive?
That's what I think.
These are the crosses we must bear when we serve alone.
Betty's traveling.
As Betty's traveling, exactly. So the junior warden is now in charge of so many things. Well, thank you all for gathering. Some of you for a second time. We will do a brief recap of our forum in a moment. And then we'll be meeting for one more Sunday, next Sunday. In this capacity, know that there will be many opportunities coming up for you to join in small configurations of people to ask more questions. I think it's important to clarify at the outset too, because of our conversation last week. I think there may have been some lack of understanding that some of our members are in what's called the advanced gifts portion, which means they have already received a packet full of information that has lovely pictures and information in it. And some of you are in the congregational gifts phase of our campaign, which means you will be getting a packet with all that information. And how, you ask, did that separation happen? Well, we looked down the list in our feasibility survey, and unlike many churches and nonprofits that prioritize their wealthiest donors in the advanced gifts, we tried to get a cross-section of every kind of donor, looking at people who were really involved or eager to be involved so that we can have early conversations and get good feedback, and also get those advanced gifts that any capital campaign wants to have before it launches and goes public. So if you hear in some folks' questions references to materials you've not yet seen, fear not. Those are coming. The majority of the congregation is in that second phase, and we'll see them when they come out. But let's start, as we always do, with prayer. And because this is the prayer for our capital campaign created by our Spiritual Emphasis Committee, I think it's appropriate for us to pray it together. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray together. O God, whose love knows no end, and whose dwelling is with the humble and generous of heart, inspire in us a spirit of holy generosity. Free us from the fear that clings to wealth, so that through our giving, opening our hands in trust and joy, we may become repairers of the breach, builders of a house where love can dwell, and all are welcome. Make of this campaign more than bricks and mortars, but instead a living sign of your kingdom, where justice is known, compassion takes root, and your grace flows freely through your people. Through Jesus Christ, who with you and the Holy Spirit lives and reigns, one God, now and forever. Amen. The text, the scripture text that undergirds, that actually forms, surprisingly, the foundation, apropos of the theme of this campaign, the foundation on which we're building, is this text from Isaiah. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. A prophecy from the prophet Isaiah about a people living amidst the rubble of empire, not specifically about a building that had fallen down that needed to be rebuilt, but both a spiritual and a physical transformation that was needed in the midst of the community, the people of Israel. And as our original committee, which was a group of folks we called the core team who did work with the vestry and with many of you to help design a listening phase and a feasibility phase, which we'll talk about, as they talked about and prayed over the projects that relate to this campaign and the projects that were brought forward by this congregation. The consultants who worked with us kept hearing echoes of this scripture verse in what we talked about. In part because we seek not only in this campaign to do work that will ensure the longevity of this building and also enable us through this building to better serve our neighbors and our ministries, but because through the work we're doing as we talk to each other and with each other about the money and the resources we steward, we're also seeking to transform our own theologies of money. That we would find healthier ways of thinking about and relating to the resources we call ours, our income, our finances. That's in part, and it's probably no surprise if you've come to previous years' stewardship forums, that Jesus talks about money more than any other topic. And yet in the church, and often even in the Episcopal Church, we have a very shallow or thin theology of money when there is so much deep well of wondering and work done by the theologians, leaders, and the forebears of faith who talk about this, including Jesus. So I wanted to make sure we went back to this text at the beginning. Just to say we start, as always, with why. The why of this campaign, the values and the theology that form the foundation of our projects are echoed again and again in the ways we've taken each step of this process. And I want to cover that again. We talked a little bit about it last week. So last week, we sort of took a deep dive into how we got here. That is the background. I mentioned our listening phase and our feasibility phase. But even before that, we had a long experience, like any church, probably any homeowner, with a legacy of deferred maintenance. St. John's is actually far more active than most in trying to keep up with that deferred maintenance. But like most homeowners and like most church communities, we did so in a reactive way. Oh, the boiler is broken. We need to call our repairman in. As last summer, my favorite discovery last summer, or at the beginning of this year, was it this year or last year, property folks, with the flat roof? Was it this summer?
We're talking about the elevator that we did.
Yeah, or the elevator. There are so many projects where I just found out the other day that we repaired our elevator this summer. I didn't know that. That was a significant project. You'll hear more about it at the annual meeting in January. But the flat roof between the two eaves of this building was a 60-year-old, maybe even older than that, 70-year-old roof. Had not been repaired, replaced, or touched in the time since it had been built. And under a routine inspection, somebody was able to put a stick straight through the tar paper and the wood. We were probably one or two good snowstorms away from really bad water infiltration. And so we reactively, but faithfully, completely renovated that roof. We have a brand new roof up there. So we've talked a little bit about those things that we've done over the years and a desire to get out ahead of them as best as possible. So during the listening phase, we convened what I mentioned earlier, the core team, a group of leaders, both the vestry members and folks who had some experience with our property and building. They prayed together, they worked with the vestry, and then we did a survey of the whole congregation. We had really good feedback because unlike other institutions that seek to go to only a few influential or maybe high capacity donors to say, what's the project that you believe we should do and what's feasible, we wanted to listen to the whole congregation, both about what are the projects we envision would be beautiful to do here, and also how is it we've related to money in the past and how would we like to change that. So we tackled both of those things in the listening phase. Then out of that, we had a huge basket of projects collected. And you may have remembered receiving the feasibility survey and it said, here are $6.7 million worth of projects that we could do. Some of you thought, that's really, really audacious. And when we came back at the end of it and said, here are the $3 million worth of projects we think we can do, some of you thought, that was a failure. You presented 6.7 and you're only doing less than half of that. I want to make sure that I reframe that for you because that outcome was, for all in leadership, a very positive outcome. We didn't want to come to you with the tested and pre-approved $3.5 million worth of projects or $2 million worth of projects. We wanted to show you everything you had said in the listening phase as democratically as possible, that your ideas made it into the feasibility process. And then we wanted to listen together. What is it that we most believe we could fund together, all of us, not just our biggest donors, not just our most influential donors. And that's how we arrived at the end of our feasibility process at that number of just under $3 million. I'm gonna get my, this is where the money people are looking at me going, like, make sure you get your decimal points correct, Jared. So, large capital improvements, projects regularly occurring, we've talked about. But we also noticed over the last several years a significant increase on the use of our space. That means both outside groups. As of this week, we now have a 7th 12-step group that is contracted to use our space. We have, as you know, a year-round school for music and quartet that uses our space. We have Big Wonder Early Childhood School, which is focused on using race and gender and the justice around those two issues at the core of their curriculum. It's a unique offering in the country and in our city. We have about 60 different ministries in St. John's that use space from time to time, both social, spiritual, formative, and outreach oriented. And we have groups like just events that come and go from our space, whether they be receptions after evensongs or receptions after weddings. We have a high demand for the use of our spaces, and it's only growing. During the feasibility study, the way we gathered information was we sent out that survey with all of the projects you had named and that the vestry had heard over the years and the property committee had collected. We put them all down, and as you know, $6.7 million worth of projects were tested. We did 19 interviews of parishioners, and another 105 households took our survey, meaning that 54% of our congregation responded during that feasibility process. So a very, very high level of response to those projects. And out of that, the $3 million were deemed feasible and the projects determined. As you may have read the feasibility study report, great care must be taken in inviting all gifts of all sizes. This is a shift now in response to that other why about our relationship to money and how we've done it in the past and how we want to do it now. That we want to pay attention to all gifts and donors, all sizes of gifts, all donors' capacities. And this shift is a shift away from the money narratives of the congregation from previous campaigns. In addition, it is connecting to the deeper why of this campaign, to the values that the congregation has that'll be critical. This campaign cannot be done for the sole purpose of raising money, but must be done, as our consultants told us, as a vehicle for change making, to enable our congregation to make change both in the lives of our congregants, but also in our wider community. I hope you have taken time to read our whole feasibility report, our new capital campaign web page, landing page off of our St. John's main web page. You can click on the link there and it'll take you to the campaign landing page. It has archived all of these things, our listening phase report, our feasibility report, and all the information that we put out thus far in the campaign. With the help of architects at OPN and a design team, again, of members, we were able to refine the projects listed in the feasibility process that related to both the category of love, which was, as you remember, the fund that would help us take care of capital reserve projects and, capital improvement projects, a reserve fund, and also welcome and community projects. So some projects linked under that grouping of projects. Those projects include an ADA compliant bathroom set of 3 on this level, a fireside refreshment, a modern and safe catering kitchen, which we talked about last Sunday, and a pre-function space in front of it, as well as new reconfigured storage and a brand new gathering space just off of the parish hall in what was at one time envisioned to be the parish gym locker rooms, and have not been used as such, I think, since the first few years of the existence of this space. So, I would love to talk more about the specifics of our conversation last week, but if you weren't here, it's archived online. You can watch the whole recording. And members of our current capital campaign committee, raise your hands. Excellent. So those folks are available to answer questions at any time, as well as I am. But now let's move to the projects we didn't talk about last week, which are the remaining projects under the category of welcome and community. We're sitting in project 1. For a long time, the Fireside Room at St. John's has been our most sought after space. Understandably, if you look around this space, it's a lovely room. Beloved for good reason. It has beautiful mid-century lines, wood paneling, cozy fire with comfy furniture. This room has hosted almost every faith formation hour ever conducted at St. John's in its history. What's more, this room hosts a myriad of activities, from staff meetings weekly to monthly vestry meetings, evensong and wedding receptions, bridge games, AA groups, and so much more. You've been a part of many of those groups. It was last updated with some cosmetic changes just around 2012, some a little before and some a little after 2012, a kind of succession of small projects that included a new carpet, reupholstered furniture, and more. Yet with the high level of use, even these are in need of a refresh, not to mention some of the deeper needs for this room. You can just look at the floor and see, yes, new carpet does not look new anymore. Chris just shampooed and cleaned it diligently before the launch of the program year, and it still looks like it has seen better days. It is a high traffic, high use space. So what you have on screen here is just one of the architect's renderings for use of the space. So sticking with the idea of a gathering table that could be moved around the room and used, such as the one in the back that we use for smaller group meetings and when we want to separate over there. And then followed by configuration of nice, soft, comfortable furniture that would also be configurable and rearrangeable for use of this space. What is not pictured are things like smaller tables for things like bridge or receptions, but there are lots of options. This space is a very flexible space, and we hope and intend to keep it that way, with fire on this end, and potentially, should the funds be sufficient enough, no longer a floating technology, but something that can be just installed permanently or come down from the ceiling. And so those are some of the things that would be added. But most importantly, what will be included definitely in this renovation will be new flooring. So all new surfaces underneath your feet, new ceiling, taking away these tiles and replacing them with sheetrock or some other higher quality finish. A glass wall that begins here at the door off the buffet behind this couch that runs the entire length of the room, that will hopefully encourage a greater sense of connection to the gallery beyond our doors here, so that events that want to spill out into that space don't feel like they're happening in a separate room, but can see and come and go from here. Also allowing a lot more light into the space. And then, of course, new finishes and new furniture everywhere you look in the space. Projects that may be added to our reserve fund as we move forward. You'll see new windows pictured in this and in the previous slide. We would love for these to be more energy efficient. And an overall development for this wing of the building is some new HVAC that will, in fact, eliminate the need for window units that make it a lot louder and noisier. So there's potential there. I know there was questions about mini splits. There are ways to resolve that, but the hope is that this project will alleviate some of the changes with seasons that make this a less comfortable and hospitable space. So that is some of what's coming in the refresh of the Fireside Room. Most of you can't see this with great specificity, like all the tiny details, but I wanted to throw in just the blueprint image of this so that you can kind of get a sense of what we're talking about with new projects, because our next category of projects is the reception and restrooms. So if we're in the Fireside Room, which is here, this massive space, just behind that wall there, currently is a storage room that runs pretty much the length of the room to about the second panel, where it begins one of two bathrooms. So instead, we will have a storage room that runs this length, which still would be the same depth, a much condensed storage space, and then three brand new ADA compliant modern bathrooms that are far more private. If you've ever used those bathrooms, you know that while they are private visually, they are not private audibly. And since there is a gallery just beyond where people gather and socialize, it means that folks are usually gathering and socializing just outside the doors of your bathroom as you use it. This will create essentially down this storage space, a small corridor, and then 3 bathrooms, eliminating the 2 facing the gallery and making them face in this direction with an added benefit of sound protection. Yeah.
Okay, is that 3 stalls?
No,
Three?
3 separate individual bathrooms, and they'll be slightly larger than the ones there, so they'll be ADA compliant for wheelchair access. What most people don't know is that off of the reception and office space, that right now there is a bathroom kind of back in here that is only ever been used by staff. It's more almost like a utility room. It has like a utility sink and then a toilet and a door. So we're actually, the plumbing is all here. It needs to be rerouted a little bit, but it's all in this area. So very doable. Take back my notes. Everyone knows Jared without a script is tedious. So just to recap, the project will provide us with refreshed reception and welcome space. Again, that's kind of off the office, and potentially doing something down at the bottom of the steps to greet folks as they come and go. We're in the midst of applying for a security grant that will essentially give us a lot of extra resources in this campaign for the technology that makes us more welcoming. Because as you know, we have part-time staff at the front, but if you walk in the 60 Kent Street doors and you don't know where you're going, you don't see a human face until you find your way up the steps. So we're looking at multiple solutions. One would be camera, screen, buzzer. I can see you, I can talk to you, and I can help you into the building. That keeps us safer, but also is more hospitable. But those are things that would be an add-on to the campaign through this grant. So we're working on that kind of parallel with it to allow that space to be even more hospitable, but it will get a refresh. Then we will also, we've long known that our bathrooms, as I say, need an update. So those are included in this. And then of course, they'll be fully accessible for our guests, which on this level, there is no ADA compliant bathroom. So if you are in the church on a Sunday morning and you have a wheelchair and you need to use a restroom that's ADA compliant, you have to take the long path from worship to this level, to an elevator, to the basement, and then again, a long path to the ADA compliant bathrooms outside the choir room. This will cut that distance in half. So. And then underneath our feet, the most underutilized and yet crowded space in the building is, for the majority of the life of this parish, a little known space off of the former gym, now known as our parish hall, has functioned as the catch-all for generations of both junk and unused items, alongside, or lesser used items, alongside tables, chairs, and the functional but lesser seen items that help us with the day-to-day functioning of this building. This space will be, formerly was a locker room, it had complete with showers and toilets, will be transformed into a reconfigured storage, so a smaller but much more efficient storage space with new surfaces and new finishes and a new lounge to accommodate the growing need for meeting space in our building. As I say at the outset, the 12-step groups, the ministry meetings, Artaria, House of Prayer, theater groups, and so many, many more. So this space would be essentially, well, we'll go to the next slide. This is, again, another configurable, slightly more condensed version of this room that could accommodate up to about 49 people for mid-sized to large groups. So think again, 12-step groups and theater groups that don't need the whole parish hall and don't need this giant room, but also need a little bit of privacy. They don't want folks just passing through to see what they're up to. And you'll love the ad of an accent wall that includes our slogan, Church of the Open Door. The way we'll get light in is off of these window wells. They're not really wells, but they're small kind of letterbox windows in the space that let light in. We'll be creating a little bit of optical illusion to help more light reflect down them by color and by changing the glass.
Could I ask just a quick question?
Yeah, absolutely.
How much compliance conformity do we have to deal with when you're opening new spaces? You just said 49. I was gonna ask, what's capacity? And it seems like, you know, the fire, there are several agencies
Yeah,
in the community that care about.
absolutely. And because of the historicity of the building and because of our being just the makeup of this church, we often get a little bit of leeway, but in the new development, new building, you kind of want to start with compliant to the current code. So this, all of the that you're looking at is both fire compliant and also AD, you know, where possible is accessible. And this room would be fire compliant at 49. Essentially 50 is the break point for the addition of a new egress to that space and all of those things. So keeping it carefully at the right size and footprint. So looking at this space, if we were looking downstairs, we talked last week about the catering kitchen, which is in the existing footprint of our current kitchen, so no smaller, no larger. The pre-function space, which ends here, and then from here all the way to the wall, so essentially about here, all the way to the wall, is currently used as storage and was the locker rooms. We would be cutting back the storage to about half of what it currently is, so getting rid of a lot of stuff that we don't use anymore. It would house some of the large muscle play work for Big Wonder. It would include tables for our dining and chairs for our dining when we reconfigure the space in there up to the number of seats that we max out at and no more. Currently, there's a little extra in there. And then getting rid of a lot of things we don't no longer use, but that we're hanging on to for in the homes. Those of you who've been around St. John's long enough know this was affectionately known as the Big Wonder storage space. So not Big Wonder, sorry, the Huge Sale storage space. Huge Sale, like many churches, we had a twice annual rummage sale for decades and decades that was the principal source of our income for outreach. So about $7,000 a year was raised in those two separate fundraisers. We folded all of that budget into our operating budget, now supported by pledges from parishioners, and sunsetted the Huge Sale because it was a huge use of space for 2 to 3 days out of the year. And there are a lot of thrift stores and other organizations that do that same work probably much more efficiently than we can. So this back half of the space will now be this community room. The thing that's harder to see in the image, but when your packet of materials come, our architects were deeply enamored of the waffle poured concrete foundation style, the mid-century architecture of the substructure of our building that no one ever sees, but you can see it in the storage room, which is to say there are the framework of the ceiling itself has pockets, waffle-like pocket holes in it where it was a poured slab, but it looks really cool and to the modern eye as kind of a industrial chic look. So they're going to preserve the poured concrete ceiling in that new room, so we'll get to actually appreciate it, which is kind of fun.
We have doors.
Yes.
Where are they going from where to where? And
So-
what do they look like?
Yeah, well, we're not down to the granular on like finishes on everything, but
Do they move?
yes. So currently in the kitchen, so come into the kitchen, there's a single door and a single door on either end of that pre-function space, so like a single wide door. We'll be removing one of the single doors and creating a double door, or essentially preserving the existing double door that goes into the storage as it is, because that's the post here marks the outer wall of the pre-function space, and those double doors are now access to this whole storage area. And we'll preserve that or add new doors, but there'll be a double door.
Private.
And then to maintain the functionality of our storage, we will add double doors to this interior storage room. And then we will be adding double doors to make it more like an open floor. If you ever wanted to make this like, say we're having an event like the annual meeting and you wanted to put your children's programming right off of this space in the pre-function and in the lounge, you could actually open it up and then there would be a lot more flow for different groups of kids and things like that. So just one option that you do that. Yes, Sue.
You mentioned grants. What are the source of grants? Is it federal, state, diocesan?
So one grant that we're applying for, the grant for security is a federal grant that is still currently exists. It has not been eliminated. We've had the assistance of a security firm who specializes in both consulting with faith communities around security, but also one of their largest sources of income is walking churches through the grant application process, kind of guiding those steps. So currently Betty Ashcroft, our senior warden, and Jeff Olson, and a small group of parishioners are on a security task force. As you know, issues around security and safety in churches are kind of at the forefront of all of our minds these days. And so we're hopeful that with our close proximity to the governor's mansion, the Capitol building, and some of the vulnerable populations who call this church home, that we would qualify. We're being super careful about the way we talk about our vulnerable populations, knowing that diversity, equity, and inclusion are not popular words in the current federal administration. So we do think we qualify. We're hopeful we'll get it. We're being guided by the best. So we're hopeful that that extra help will get us there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Which brings us to questions and conversation. And there's a lot more I could say, but I want to make sure that I leave time here, a full 15 minutes for conversation before I sprint out and throw on a chasuble and do the other thing I do here. You may also be wondering why Jared has done all the talking and not the committee. Know that they're all very well versed in the projects that we're doing. They're having conversations one-on-one with many of our members right now. So eager to answer your questions as well. It has made it a lot simpler to have one presenter and one person at the helm, but know that they're all easily accessible to you as well. If you walked in late, for real quick, raise your hands one more time, members of the committee, and then I see Rick has a question.
If we renovate this room, it will take a certain amount of time. Do we have space elsewhere in the building for groups to meet?
That's a great question. St. John's is nothing if not well versed in adapting our use of space, which we're doing right now. Essentially, what we're about to do in creating new spaces would alleviate the need for us to constantly be playing shuffle the deck. So a good example today, there will be wayfinders after church. There will be vestry after church. There will be coffee hour after church. And I'm surprised there's not something else because they're obvious. There we are, and a Bible study. Many Sundays, that means when vestry coincides with an event like Wayfinders, the vestry goes to the green room and hangs out in the youth space. But if you know anything about youth and children ministry, one of the things you're taught is that children and youth should know that the space is dedicated to them either at schools or in their churches or home is their space. And that it's not going to just get like co-opted into other purposes without their consent, so that they know we care enough to make a space. It's just like your child's bedroom. You wouldn't put a guest in their bedroom without getting the child's consent because it's their bedroom, and therefore they should be able to have some say about how it's used. So we're going to start to alleviate those kinds of like second level conflicts, but even more so, we're going to start to reduce the level of like, hey, our Taria's in the building at the same time as this funeral. Can we have them in a part of the building rehearsing where we're not going to hear it in the middle of the remembrances? That's now going to be possible. So we're already learning how to swap people in and out. So I expect for things like vestry, green room, and undercroft will become used again. Unfortunately, we'll be leaning on the children and youth spaces for a brief period of time to accommodate those, because they're both sizable spaces, but we've dedicated them to the children and to the youth. So it will work.
Then also, Rick, it was part of our conversation with Chris.
Speak up,
this week for his.
Don, speak up just a bit.
Excuse me, yeah, so I think we have the right person with our building manager.
Yeah.
To manage the flow of those different needs.
Yep.
With Chris Tegler, and that was part of our conversation about what he needs to be able to, excuse me, what he needs from us to be able to support his efforts to support this, let's just say, flux transition time.
One of the good things we have is we have two really talented staff who are really familiar with how to do that juggling. So Chris Tegler, as building manager, does a lot of it, particularly around project management. So when the stuff is happening, that's what Don's referring to, is when contractors are coming and going, when rooms need to be shut. And then we also have Sarah Dull, who oversees all of the technological side of our space use, which is a big asset that we have. When we want to reserve something, we know it can't conflict because of the reservation system doesn't allow for space conflict. So no one can kind of double book spaces, or they'll see immediately if they want to have a meeting, they go to the reservations, they can see, oh, that's not available right now. I need to find a different space. So we've got a lot of tools at our disposal to mitigate that. Other questions? Yeah, Holly.
This feels a bit like a detail, so I apologize, but when you mentioned that this might be a glass wall.
Yes.
And then you mentioned downstairs and there was that big sign on the wall of, it got me to thinking about the aesthetic of the rooms as well as the learning, and where I'm going with this is art.
Yeah.
And I was kind of curious whether and it may be a down the road conversation.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of curious about in the design of the spaces, whether you've given some thought to whether there are opportunities for us to show artwork in any of the, I don't want to go into any more detail than that, but just, what would that mean?
Yeah.
For where we're going with this renovation?
Yeah, there's a lot of space where that's possible. And one of the suggestions for the pre-function space out, off the parish hall and before the kitchen, because it is kind of an oddly shaped room at the moment, there is an option to make that a gallery essentially as well, so that there could be, rotating shows that go through there, just as this is intended for that, but often isn't utilized in that way. If any of you have been to our cathedral recently, you know that they've recently gotten a parishioner who oversees their gallery and who's very active, proactive about planning installations. And it went from being kind of a on again, off again art space to being kind of a really like sought after art space. If you walk in, almost every time it catches your attention as something thoughtful, theological, and you're not wrong, Holly. It's kind of downstream. The final design work is still yet to be done. We're in the kind of the early design, which is always unnerving because you want to put pictures up to show people what it's going to be. And at the same time, you don't want people to think we're committed to everything you see. Like there's going to be violin concerts in this space. It may not be the use of the space. So there is some final refinement and it will be significant deep design work to go in, both on use of the space, but also finish of the space. So, yeah.
Well, I second and third your questions and suggestions, and when you look around right now, it feels a little choppy.
Yeah.
So there has to be a dedicated space, and I was a member of the cathedral for 40 years, and the space that you're identifying has, as long as I can remember, been that for display.
Yeah.
And right now, Robert Tubles has a display there, and once was called the choir, and then it was called, and we opened it up when Dean Hancock was there. That whole thing was full, and the fire marshals were going crazy. I do and have, for good reason, I think, had concern about security. Real concern about security. I love being in the Church of the Open Door, but I also have really bad images that kind of flash to me now and again. And I also read in a message from Provost Kingsley about security, how it's being handled at the cathedral right now. And I just think it's really important for us to know. And also to know whether personnel is going to be an issue. Because as I understand, the way he explained what's going on at the cathedral right now is plainclothes people. However, there's some way to identify them and let everybody know that they belong.
Right.
So I have a real concern about it. I mean, I get Annunciation flashing before.
Yes, absolutely, Jan. Thanks for naming that, and to be clear to all of you, Tim Kingsley, Provost Kingsley, that Jan mentions, is co-owner or principal at the consulting agency that we're using, Kingswood Consulting, Security Consulting. So it's nice to have someone who not only gets faith institutions, but also someone who gets Episcopal faith institutions. It's been really helpful to have his eyes on our work. So security is high on our priorities. The key is if the grant comes in, we'll get the top of the line solutions. And if the grant doesn't come, we'll do some other kind of more functional but less less technological forward and probably more as we are now. We've just added security to the big Wonder floor, and it's just been, you know, a couple $100 coded doors, switching out the existing locks to make them much more secure. But they're not tied into a synchronized system, which would be the top end solution. The current solution has been buying something at Menards and having it installed. It works. It would keep the kids safer. It's just a lot extra work for managing who, you know, who knows the code and who doesn't know the code and all of that. So we're definitely going to make security a priority in this process. Other questions? Yeah.
Couple, one is more superficial. The idea of glass all along this. You know, when we have meetings in here, and we're in here for book group and some other things, you're very aware of
Yes.
people walking up and down this corridor, which they do regularly at times
Yes.
during the day. And I think having all glass is gonna do two things. It's gonna be more distracting to people who are here in a meeting for this phenomenon of people walking back and forth, A, and B, there's a certain, even though this is a gigantic room, there is a certain intimacy in a group that you have when you're focusing on something. And I'm just a little concerned
Yeah.
that that's going to really radically change the character of this place.
Thank
That's-
you.
That's the first question.
Yeah, yeah.
The second question is, the plan that you have in the basement for that new room, the doors from that don't go out into the big gym area, because I guess that's the stage or whatever. They come around and go into that room that's now gonna be a 40-foot long conference room or whatever it is you're calling it. And the storage room, all space is also
Off of that.
off of
pre-function
that.
space.
And I really, again, you know, last week I questioned the usefulness of a 40-foot, however long that new space is supposed to
Yep.
be for gatherings or meetings. Seeing the exit and entrance into the other new conference room makes me doubly doubt the usefulness of that long room, unless there's some way of breaking it up into smaller spaces for that are really useful for a meeting.
No, I appreciate that, Phil. And in fact, as a couple other comments last Sunday really made their way into the thoughts of the leadership committee as like final design. So to Holly's point, not everything is perfect in this design. It is meant to show us kind of the direction we're heading. And so in final design, I think that is a conversation that's going to come back up, is how to reconfigure that pre-function space more usefully. Some of the original ideas have been about groupings of seatings for things that don't need to be private, but that, you know, during, say, coffee hour, now people have to have their kind of intimate conversation in a public, you know, in a couch in the corner. Now with this, there could be a separate groupings of chairs, and people could kind of wander out of the noisy room and into a quieter space and have smaller conversations. But it's not the only solution. To your question about this space, we thought about that with the glass wall. It means that some of our groups that really are book group size, staff meeting size, small 12-step groups, they are going to go to that new space that is in private. There won't be distractions in there. It'll be an easier, and it will be comfy like this room. It will have all of the kind of the coziness that we have, sans fireplace, but that it will feel like a nice meeting space. There are other options for the glass, including frosting it 2/3 of the way up so that you don't see people, but lets light in and allows you some sense of porousness between the two spaces. There was initially a proposal to make that what's called a nano wall, which are probably seen in, if you follow any design groups, they're very popular right now, collapsible glass walls that accordion out and in. So if you made it frosted and you wanted it to be completely open, you could open it up. It was not currently in the cost range, but it wasn't very far out of the cost range. So it just depends on both how we use the reserve fund, or if donations come beyond the stretch goal. There are a lot of potential solutions to the thing. We're not unaware of those concerns, but I think they're very resolvable ones. The gains for this space, because its primary function was intended to be a large group gathering space, not small groups gathering space. And when we did the Undercroft renovation, you'll recall, if you were here during that time, that was intended to be the catch-all for small. There's a conference room, there's a meditation space, and then there's a central gathering space about half the size of this. And that was meant to kind of resolve the big group, small group. But now that that's children's space, which it should be, because that's close to the worshiping space, right on off of it, we've kind of lost that flexibility again. So those are some of the things. Yeah, Roger.
Just commenting on windows from a safe church perspective, this really doesn't have enough public viewing for like what one-on-one or 3 or 4 people who need to be under that.
So yeah, that's the other, it's like the questions about compliance, ADA and otherwise. And then there's our own church infrastructure, understandable compliance, which is safe church, particularly around vulnerable adults and children, trying to make sure that we upgrade to the level that is most safe church. So visibility into each room where you might be able to meet alone.
Right,
Yeah.
it's not an argument for a full glass wall, but more visibility
Yeah, yeah.
than it currently has.
Yeah. I'm aware that it is 15 minutes too, and so I need to step out so that I can play the other part, but there was one other hand up, Dawn.
Well, yeah, I think you just hit on a couple of things, and I haven't just gone through this with a massive, building expansion at St. Thomas. You know, all of this is gonna really catalyze some other thinking about how we use these spaces, you know, where these meetings should be and where these,
Right.
once you see the space, you can plan all you want about,
Right.
oh, we'll put this meeting there, put this meeting there. But once you see the spaces, once you're living in them, then you can rethink how we're coordinating the various meetings and the programming that goes on in these spaces. And I would also add, you know, like the collapsible wall idea, you know, there's a lot of ideas that the architects came to us with, which we all had to reduce down to get within our budget. So if we exceed, then there's some really other cool things that we could engage in.
And to that end, I always hate to end with something really spicy, but money. I didn't cover that. Let me just really quickly talk about the budget. So last week we talked about the cost of the building reserve fund being $1 million. It'll get us started towards having a pot of money for future repairs and maintenance. Then there was the catering kitchen and small gathering space, which in total comes to about $550,000. The community lounge we've talked about today is priced out currently at $343,923. The reception and the ADA compliant restrooms would be another $126,000. We didn't talk today about the stretch goal. The fireside room, $522,000. We didn't talk about the stretch goal, and we haven't talked about the contingency costs. We're building in about $200,000 of contingency, both for hazardous material abatement, other kinds of costs for new furniture, things like that are not in the actual building cost, and then overages. And then we'll talk about the stretch goal, which is an additional, we were able to, with the help of our consultants, see that it would be feasible if everyone stretched to raise an additional $210,000 for a stretch goal. We'll talk about that next week alongside our annual stewardship. So what would be the purpose of a stretch goal, and what are we doing with annual stewardship this year, and how do those two things relate to each other? So we've taken the first 2 sessions to talk about buildings and grout and windows and carpets. We'll do a little more talking about program and operating costs of this building and institution in our next session. So thanks for being here. Thanks for your really good questions. These will be sent out on Wednesday of this week, and each week that we're in session, and then archived for you to come back to if you have more questions. And I look forward to seeing you. Take those, save the date, RSVP by the 22nd. We want to see you at this brunch. It will be fun.
Thank you.
All right.
That's this week.
That's this week. Yes. Cheers.
Wednesday.